Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us for the poetry performance. We're so thrilled to have everyone here. So I'm going to give a few comments. My name is Aya. I'll be the moderator for this session. And I'm going to give just a few comments about what the poetry performance is going to be like and the thought process behind it. After which I'll introduce our first 6 poets who will each perform in order. And then I'll introduce the following 6 poets, and hopefully we'll have time for some Q&A. So this plenary is titled Palestine in Parallel, because today we seek to take advantage of the unique opportunity that poetry gives us to narrate our past, our presents, and our futures. As Palestinians, we've been both displaced internally and externally, and the Palestine we write for is both a land and a metaphor for freedom. And this freedom is inextricably linked to the freedom of all oppressed and colonized people around the world. So this poetry performance is so special because we're lucky to feature Palestinian poets both from Palestine and within the diaspora, as well as Indigenous and African poets to recite various pieces both in Arabic and English. Please don't forget to add their poems to your swag bag after the performance. Those poems will be available both in English and in Arabic. And as a reminder, if you click the interpretation globe at the bottom of your screen, you'll be able to get interpretation in English and in Arabic. So as artists, thinkers, and writers, we have the ability not only to articulate the world as it is in its full honesty, but also to imagine the world as it should be. The poet can envision a world of possibility. So today I've asked our poets to consider the questions: what does a free Palestine look like to you? And who are you in a free Palestine? Before we start, I want to remind everyone that though we are watching this all from home and safely social distancing, poetry performance is about community and engagement. So if you hear a line that resonates with you or moves you, feel free to snap your fingers, stomp your feet, holler at your desk, or type in the chat box. Thank you all again for being here. So I'm going to introduce the first 6 performers now, and the last 6 performers before their sessions. After the performance is finished, I hope we'll have 10 to 15 minutes to take questions from the audience. So please, as the performers are going, you can add questions to the Q&A at any time. First up, we have Rafeef Ziad. Rafeef is a Palestinian spoken word artist, academic, and human rights activist based in London, UK. Her performances of poems like We Teach Life, Sir, and Shades of Anger went viral within days of release. Since releasing her first album, Hadid, Rafeef has headlined prestigious performance venues across several countries. Her second album, We Teach Life, was a powerful collection of spoken word and original music compositions, which she brings to the stage with Australian guitarist and producer Phil Mansour. She will be releasing her latest album, 3 Generations, here at Palestine Writes. After that, we will have Dareen Tatour. Dareen Tatour is a Palestinian poet, photographer, and social media activist from Reyne, Palestine. In 2010, she published a book entitled The Last Invasion. She was arrested by the Israeli police for a poem titled Resist My People, Resist Them, on charges of incitement of violence, and sent to 5 months in jail and years under house arrest. After, we will have Tariq Luthan, who is a Detroit-born Palestinian community organizer, data consultant, and Emmy Award-winning poet from Detroit. He earned his MFA in poetry from the program for writers at Warren Wilson College and is the current development coordinator of the Offing Literary Magazine after a 2-year stint as the editor of the micro department. His first collection of poetry, How the Water Holds Me, was awarded Editor's Choice by Bull City Press and is available now. After that, we'll have Mark Tilson. Mark K. Tilson is an Oglala Lakota poet educator from the Pine Ridge Indian Reservation. He comes from activist families long steeped in the struggle for liberation for all people and the long-term survival of the Lakota Nation. At Standing Rock, he was a direct action trainer and a police liaison. Since then, he has led trainings and teach-ins about the lessons learned from Standing Rock, his first book of poetry, It Ain't Over Till We're Smoking Cigars on the Drill Pad, recalls the struggle against the pipeline through a blend of journal entries and poems. After, we'll have Fadi Judah, who is a Palestinian American poet and physician. He has published 4 collections of poems and translated several collections of poetry from Arabic. He is the co-editor and co-founder of the Edel Adnan Poetry Prize. Finally, we'll have Tahani Saleh in the first half. Tahani Saleh is a Brooklyn-based performer, poet, educator, and activist. She has been seen on HBO's Def Poetry Jam and was a member of the 2007 New Yorker National Slam team. She is a graduate of Columbia University and a former professor of curriculum at CUNY. Thank you all, and welcome to the stage, Rafif Ziadeh.
Thank you so much, Aya, for that wonderful introduction. Thank you, everybody joining us from all over the world, from Jerusalem to Toronto. And thanks to all the organizers of this remarkable festival. And I'm sure it's taken so much behind the scenes work. We don't have a lot of time, so I'll get straight into it. The first poem I'll be reading is called 3 Generations. It's the title track from my new album. And to out myself, I wrote it on my 40th birthday. Every inhale. I am 3 generations of women who never made it past 40. I'm 3 generations of women who never made it past 40. They were erased one way or another. Bullets or memories of bullets stole them. I'm 3 generations of women who were the wrong people, the wrong religion in a state designed exclusive, settled on earth and skin. I'm 3 generations of patching tents and homes, of picking up and starting new, suitcases and keys, of saving scraps because the siege might come and it always, always comes, of sleeping on airport floors, of memorizing immigration questions and maps, of loving men too in love with their revolutions to really love, of loving boys, still wondering where home went, of marking funerals as loud as we mark weddings, of dabke like life depended on it, of joy and love against skies of steel, of joy and love against skies of steel. I am 3 generations of women who never made it past 40. Every exhale. I'm their every sigh by a window, every bus ride to the prison waiting room, every hug long enough to be broken by a soldier, every trembling hand searching in the ruins, every candle, every notebook, every za'atar sandwich between the notebooks, every exam with no electricity, every whisper and kiss under the blankets so the kids won't hear it, every angry stare at a checkpoint, every made up lyrics because my mother spoke in poetry but could not remember songs, every breath and every gesture, every meal, rough hands yet gentle, every braid, fingertips dancing through thick black hair, every braid, fingertips dancing through thick black hair. They are with me. They carry me. I'm 3 generations of women who made it. I am 3 generations of women who made it in my every inhale, in my every exhale. They made it. We made it. We made it. Sorry, it's really hard to do these poems when you're sitting alone in your room. I'll move on very quickly to read A Place. A Place is dedicated to all those who lost their lives in the March of Return in Gaza. Is there a place? Is there a place where we can be more? Is there a place where we can be more than hashtags? Is there a place where we can be more than thunderclaps and hashtags? A place where we are human and our fears not Twitter storms, our flesh not dissected in comment sections? Is there a place where we can hold each other in sorrow, in silence, in defiance, before you make a picture funeral to share widely another name fallen? Is there a place? Is there a place where the headlines don't hate us or assume that we mysteriously die, just fall, and are never killed intentionally by soldiers taking orders intentionally, by snipers taking aim intentionally, by weapons purchased intentionally, by countries that make and sell war intentionally? Is there a place? Is there a place where the headlines don't us our life like our laughter is intentional? Is there a place where I don't have to justify that our lives are also sacred and we also love our children? Is there a place where the breaking news like breaking waves doesn't just bring more bodies from the Mediterranean. Is there a place where we are more than horror stories and numbers etched on helmets, stars for generals who calculate the calories to the brink of life? Is there a place where we can just be? Just imagine it with me. A place not the most beautiful, nothing extraordinary about its skies, nothing too big about its oranges, just a place where we can sit under a tree, have a meal, just a place where they can let us be, home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rafif. I would like to welcome up next to Zareen Tatour.
مساء الخير للجميع. شكرا على هذا المهرجان اللي هو قيم جدا، وبحب أبلش بالمشاركة تبعتي بالقصائد. رح أقرأ في البداية قصيدة حريتي انكتبت في السجن، بعد ما رفضوا يعطوني طبعا عدة أقلام. بعد ما طلبت أقلام رفضوا يعطوني أقلام، فكتبت لهم قصيدة اسمها حريتي. حريتي. غلقوا علي الباب في زنزانة، شدوا الإسارة وأحكموا إقفالها، منعوا دخول النور، زادت ظلمة فرسمت مصباحا على جدرانها، مسحوا الجدار يا راعتي قد صادروا، فتوهجت شمس العيون بليلها، عصبوا العيون كذا لساني كمموا، فأنار شعري في الفؤاد ظلامها، أشعلت في روحي فتيل مشاعري فأضاء فانوس القصائد عتمها، إن قيدت تلك السلاسل معصمي، لن يسجنوا حس الحياة ونبضها، حريتي حريتي حريتي، لن يقتلوا في الشعور بحسها. القراءة الثانية راح تكون لقصيدة كمان كتبت في السجن، وهي بتحكي عن صمود الأسرى والأسيرات في ظل وجود الإضراب عن الطعام، اسمها ملحمة الأسير. إني أنا قنديل صبر من فتيل المستحيل، أنير عتمة ليلتي، زنزانتي موت واحتضار بل أنين، مشاعري كتبت على جدرانها فتنهدت آلامها، دمعا جميلا تخيلت أرض العبير، والكرمل الزاهي وناصرة الجليل، زنزانتي إني ومحكوم بها لمؤبد 20 عاما وانقضت حريتي، ما زلت أرنو وصلها، فالظلم آذن بالرحيل، الحلم حلم صادق والأسر وهم زائل في آخر الليل الطويل، صبرا أيا عمري بهذا السجن، وكل العذر من حبري وأشعاري ومن دمعي وآهاتي ومن حلمي ومن ضعفي ومن وطني ومن شعب على إضراب أمعائي ارتضى صمت الذليل، صبرا فلا سجن يعد اليوم من عمري، لأني مارد المصباح في أسري، أضيء الليل من صبري وآكل جوع أمعائي، وإن جعلوه سردابي غمام دجن أنا باق، وفي عيني أغنية تصير حياة. صبرا فها بيني وبين الشمس نافذة تناديني لأحضن لون بستاني، وتحملني لموج البحر في حيفا وتسقيني، فإني ظامئ لكن أمص الماء من جرحي، ولا أحنيك آمالي لقيد أو لسجان. المشاركة الأخيرة، القصيدة الأخيرة اللي هي بتحكي عن أطفال الحجارة، اللي هن بالنسبة لنا كفلسطينيين هن إلهام لكل معنى المقاومة والصبر والتحدي. أطفال الحجارة. في بلادي علمونا كل أطفال الحجارة أنهم كانوا كباراً، أنهم ظلوا الكبار. علمونا أن حب الأرض باق لا يمل رغم بؤس الحال فيها، رغم سود الذكريات يستفيق الصبح نوراً صوت ضحك من كمد. علمونا كل أطفال الحجارة فوق كل الفخر خير طقس في الحضارة. علمونا هؤلاء الإنس نبلاء العصر هذا أن قطع العيش حبا لم يقارن فيه شيء، حين يغفو في الفؤاد عشق حرف ليس يدري غير اسم للبلد. علمونا في ديار القدس نصر لا يساوم فيه موت، رغم أن العيش صعب فبه نحيا صامدين في جلد. علمونا كل أطفال الحجارة أن عيش الذل موت، بل وأقسى منه ثقلا. إن رضينا فيه يوما، إن جعلنا العهد فينا دون أصل واستللنا راية السلم، سوف نبلى في الزرد. في بلادي علمونا كل أطفال الحجارة أنما في الرأي قوة كالسلاح، إن أخذناه بحزم انتصرنا. علمونا أن في الأحجار قوة، أن في الكفين ثورة، فاعلموها يا جنود الذل، هيا وادركوا ما علمونا كل من عاش الصمود في المعارك، أن فينا 1000 طفل سوف يولد مدركا درب البطولة، حافظا درس الحقيقة، أن للمحتل دحرا، أن للأحرار وردا، أن للتاريخ عينا لا ترى غير من قد علمونا أن نقاوم ونقاوم لا نساوم. شكرا.
Thank you so much, Zareen. يعطيك العافية. I'd like to welcome up next Tariq Luthan.
Hey, can y'all hear me? Is it working?
You're perfect.
Okay,
Yeah.
good. Okay, sounds good. Hey, everybody, sorry for being super wide. I'm using a GoPro and it's really bad. All right. The summer my cousin went missing. I should have asked how Khaled was holding up, but I knew where she would be. Her body weary and unkind, back turned to the home she grew up in, seeds in the farm soil like miracles sprouting as she tends to them. Is this not always the case? Child upon child goes, and someone's mother is no longer that. My aunt, a mother herself, looks for a moment away. Nothing she plants has roots long enough to hold. She turns back anyway, looks ahead. If we are too caught up in the end, like boys fleeing from the day's news, however will we stay fed? However will we live long enough to grieve? Ode to Brown Child on an airplane for the first time. I don't remember if I too was afraid, but I do remember when the sky was our thing. I could say the word flight, and in its stead, none would hear the word fight spill from my jaw. The last time it took a punch, I was in the boys' bathroom surrounded by boys as a boy unleashed his fist into me. I returned the favor into his gut and ran. Moments before, he had called me gay, but I wasn't sure why I had to defend my glee, scarce as it was. Hours later, a mess of tears ran through me as I was pulled from gym by the principal and suspended for defending what little parts of myself I could still call mine. I don't know why this is the story I choose to tell, but I do know that I may forget it once we take off, shedding the skin that everyone fears of releasing towards the sun. Beautiful, isn't it, to be able to leave behind this world, its lost and angry boys. And this last poem is for anybody who grows na'na in the backyard, as my mother did, and then also totally guilted me whenever I didn't do it fast enough. I go to the backyard to pick mint leaves for my mother. Today, my mouth fell wide when I saw the light slip into the hills, and those boys I grew up with did not come back. Or so I hear. Mama would often ask me to gather the mint leaves from behind our home, and so I would leave for this nectar. Without it, there is nothing sweet to speak of. I pray that when I am gone, my people speak as sweetly of me as I do of them. I see us often steeped in the land and hope that a shore remains a shore, not a place to become yesterday. The girls have joined the boys now, all of them tucked just beyond the earth. But I know they wouldn't run from their mothers, not without a fight, a chase, a hunt, a honey, a home for the tea to set, a home for the tea to settle, a haven for us to return to. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Tariq. I hope that everyone's looking into the chat because that's where the applause is really happening. So thank you. I'd like to welcome up next Mark Tilson.
Yeah, can y'all see me?
Not yet, Mark.
Okay. The first poem I'll be reading is one called Land Back, which is part of a larger movement that's going on all throughout North America. Yeah. Land back. When we say land back, it's not a metaphor, not an analogy or a figure of speech. The land is the only thing they stole, they can return. They cannot give us back the children who died in their schools, or the 100 years our ways and spirituality were outlawed. Have you ever heard of how ants cross a great river? They form into a ball, protecting the most vulnerable among them. The bottom half drowns continuously while the top climbs and is climbed upon, drowning and climbing until they get to the other side. And when they are no longer in crisis, they rebuild. They say we have dark days ahead of us, but the hard times have been here. But we are immortal. We cannot be killed. And every time we lose one of us, 2 or 3 or 4 more relatives come into the world. And that's all you can do in the face of genocide and death. Choose life. I love my people. I love my people because they are mine. We wake up with a little rage against the machine screaming in our heads, fuck you, I won't do what you tell me. I love my people because with a gun pointed at our heads, we were told to assimilate or die. And we said no. We don't have the same God as you, Daku Shkan Shkan. That which moves all things and movement is holy. I love my people. We are infatuated with ourselves, the proudest people you have never met, and the only folks who insist on telling you how humble we are. We are humble as fuck. Lakotas killed Custer. We captured his flag, gouged his ears with awl so in the next life he can hear. We get really literal, make metaphors real. Your flag is not mine. My mom was a teen at Wounded Knee in 1973. Federal marshals came, fired bullets. She learned to shoot a 30-06 with arthritic hands, and she's been in pain since I've known her. I love my people and we are scarred. When we feel we don't have enough of them, we have the guts to give ourselves more. We carve our wrists in declarations, jump into gangs with heated knives to our shoulders. We give flesh as an offering of prayer. We spit rhetoric to fill our bellies when the prayers don't work. We balance feeling worthless with knowing of all the people of the earth, we are the best. We kick down doors because we sacred, because we think in circles, and we really dig it when white people say stuff like culturally appropriate application of whatever. If you hear that in a meeting, it means you're going to get funding. I love my people because we know how to hustle, do that special alchemy that turns government cheese into gas money. Even though life at times is not worth living, we soldier the fuck on. Family is life, right or wrong, they're your beating heart. But I hate my people. I hate my people because we die. We die young, we die stupid, we die hard. Everything becomes a goddamn metaphor for how it was. We don't crash cars. We wrap our war ponies around sacred trees going 90. At the Battle of Little Bighorn, Sitting Bull said, today is a good day to die. But messages dilate over time. The distance between here and then has left us confused. So we forget about today. We forget about good, and we are left with die. Die, die, and we've been marching on those orders ever since. I love my people, and one day we will know ourselves by more than the trail of our dead.
Thank you so much, Mark. That I'm just like taking a deep breath, as it sounds like everyone else is too. Up next, I'd like to welcome Fadi Judah.
Okay. I think I will, I'm going to read the first poem in Arabic, and And then read the second one in English, and hopefully they're short poems, and hopefully I'll have time to read the second one in Arabic as well. أكسجين. اللحظة التي ارتبطت فيها بدمك بدأ كيانك يدق ويرمش. لست أولاي ولست أولك، عدة نكبات سبقتنا، وها أنا الآن أطول من يمكث داخلك، وأنت متى شئت طردتينني شهيقا. أحيانا أرقى فوقك أزرق، بين الاشتعال والاختناق صنعنا الحياة، نحن لبعضنا نتفتح. The other poem is called Syzygy, and it is really about a child's memory. All the displacement that keeps on happening in the world, the stories of children and what they long for the most are almost eternal and recurring, and it doesn't matter whose story it is you're speaking of. This is always a child and their mother. Syzygy. When I tell it, the first time I saw hail, I tell him it was in a desert, knocked a man getting out of his car unconscious, then drove a woman into my arms because she thought the end was near, but I assured her it wasn't so. When he tells it, the first winter after their hijrah was the coldest. Rare snow came down, and his mother, who knew what that fluff was, but until then had never seen it, woke him and said, "Look outside, what do you see?" She called his name twice. He rubbed his eyes, didn't reply. She said, "This is flower from heaven." When he tells it, he's an old man smiling back to his mother. So I'll read it in Arabic, which is a different interpretation of the poem in English. أفكر بإنهاء الأشياء. انتحار صغير لا يؤذي تمكن مني، كأصوات يسمعها الأنبياء في خلوتهم، كرف إحدى خزائن المطبخ مسكونة بشبح الانخلاع عن مفصلها. سأنهي علاقتي مع الخبز مثلا لكي ينضب حنيني للثلج. فأول مرة رأيت الثلج كنا في خيمة أنا وأهلي، ولم نحضر من بيت الطين سوى منقل الفحم حين هربنا مع حمارنا الوحيد. أفكر بإنهاء الجوع في البرد القارس لأتخلص من النوم جائعا. أيقظتني أمي، كررت اسمي مرتين، قالت انظر، وأزاحت بيدها مدخل الخيمة ليتسرب ضوء القمر خادما في بلاط الدور والقدى. ما هذا؟ سألتني هي الأمية كمعلمة مدرسة، وأنا أفرك الجواب من جفوني كمن يماطل في الامتحانات الشفوية. قالت هذا طحين من السماء، وضحكت ثم خبزت. أفكر بإنهاء ما انتهى بيننا، لن أشم كتفك وأنت تقلبين الباذنجان أو تحمرين الرز. أفكر بإنهاء طفولة أولادنا، سيغفرون لي، وأفكر بألا أوقظهم حين يسقط الثلج. شكرا.
Thank you so much, and mashallah, a mastery of 2 languages. For up next, we have Tahani Saleh to conclude the first half of our poetry performance.
Hello, everyone. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you all for being here this afternoon. And thank you so much for having me participate in this. This is something that's critical to our existence. At a very young age, my mother told me that my existence is my protest. So with that, I read this poem and I congratulate everyone for participating, for writing the world to write the world. And you know, hopefully in the circumstances that we are under, we are planning and participating and taking the right steps to where we do see each other face to face in better times and with a free Palestine. 1967 Palestine. Sat a girl in a hollow, rained out cave, watching her and God's tears fall in sequence to the injustice of a land and a people. These tears flooded the history of a heart, never to forget what war and innocence looks like. My mother, in all her years of living, has never forget or turned her back on what freedom looks like. To the politicians that hunger after an Israeli Zionist love affair, who say Palestinians don't know hardship, that Palestine never existed, say their history was never written, that the children she'd come to bear would never have a story to tell. Well, I'd say, tell them I cashed the first payment on my grave the day I was born. Don't tell me I don't know hardship. Tell them that we stood to tell the stories of children who did not live long enough to rot their teeth, but long enough for the world to see their rotting bodies. That God tilts little in the sky to let us know he hasn't turned his back on us. That the battle between heart and fiction is a mortal's love for every child that goes hungry, for every mother's son who dies an unborn to death, the gift of goodbye, the burden born to bear. Tell them I come from hurricane crashing walls. Wisdom given in chaos of confusion, like daydream, like daybreak, like infinite rod spines of faith. On a land that may or may not get this, I leave you notes in the corner of the world that God is the only businessman that's kept his word, and I'm not willing to walk out the door without a deal. Tell them I used to hold tsunamis under my eyelids. Come hero time, I hold explosives under my tongue. Next to gratitude and godly, I hope you stumble upon my letter soon. But there is more than a message of existence. Tell them there are little girls in caves sharing tears with God, knowing freedom will come someday. Free Palestine.
Thank you so much, Tahani. So that was, everyone in the first half was so moving. I'd like to welcome up our next set of performers. So I'm gonna read their bios and then they'll come up one by one. And first, I'd like to also say that our first performer in our next session of the performance, happy birthday to Ibrahim Nasrallah. كل سنة وانت بخير إن شاء الله. So Ibrahim Nasrallah is a Palestinian writer who has worked as a teacher, journalist, and cultural director. He has published 14 poetry collections and 22 novels, including his epic series, The Palestinian Comedy of 12 novels covering 250 years of modern Palestinian history, which have earned numerous accolades, including most recently his second Kitara Prize for the novel, A Tank Under the Christmas Tree. In 2018, he was awarded the Booker Prize for the Arabic fiction for his novel, The Second Dog War. After Ibrahim, we'll have Jamilah Osman, who is a Somali poet and essayist from Portland, Oregon. A public school teacher for many years, she is now an MFA candidate at the University of Iowa. She was the winner of the 2019 Brunel International African Poetry Prize and the Adirondack Review's 46er Prize for Poetry. Her first chapter book, A Girl is a Sovereign State, was published in fall of 2020 by Akashic Books. After that, I'll go and share some poems. And then we'll have Remy Kanazi, who is a poet, a writer, and organizer based in New York City. He is the author of the new released collection of poetry, Before the Next Bomb Drops, Rising Up from Brooklyn to Palestine. He is also the author of Poetic Injustice, Writings on Resistance in Palestine, and the editor of Poets for Palestine. His political commentary has been featured by news outlets throughout the world, including the New York Times, Salon, Al Jazeera English, and BBC Radio. after which we'll have Lina Khaled, who is a poet, essayist, and translator. Her first book, Water and Salt, won the 2018 Washington State Book Award. Her chapbook, Arab in Newsland, won the 2016 Two Sylvias Press, and Letters from the Interior was a finalist for the 2019 John Pedrick Chapbook Prize. You can learn more about her work at linakhaleftufaha.com. And finally, we'll conclude with Fargo Tabahi, who is a queer Palestinian American performance artist, Ghassan Kanafani Resistance Arts Prize winner, and a Pushcart and Best of the Net nominee, a Tin House Summer Workshop alum, and is currently the Halkine Arts Lab Fellow working at Mosaic Theater. Thank you so much to everyone who's coming up. So next up, we have Ibrahim Nasrallah. I'd like to welcome him to the stage. Thank you.
مساء الخير لكم جميعا وكل الشكر وكل عام وأنتم بخير وفلسطين بخير وحلمنا بخير. سأقرأ مجموعة من القصائد القصيرة جدا. حيرة. في البداية قالت الخيل أريد سهولا، قالت النسور أريد القمم، قالت الأفاعي أريد جحورا، وظل الإنسان حائرا. صداقة. يا لهذه الطاولة، انحنيت على ظهرها أكتب 30 عاما ولم تقل آه، وحين رحلت لم أستطع حملها على ظهري 30 خطوة. اعتراف. أجل. البيت قبر بنافذة وباب، المنامة نصف كفن، السرير نصف تابوت، ووحدك تغيرين المشهد. 3 أيام. في اليوم الأول أمسكت بيدي ترسم تابوتا، فأرسلوا إلي إكليلا من الزهور. في اليوم الثاني أمسكت بيدي ترسم زهرة، فأرسلوا إلي تابوتا. في اليوم الثالث صرخت أريد أن أعيش، فأرسلوا إلي قاتلا. وحدة. الغريب الوحيد في غرفته الوحيدة في المدينة الغريبة قبل وصول الموت، توسط مراياه التي ادخرها ومات، كما لو أن العائلة كلها حوله. إيمان. كلما قرأت عن نمر افترس مدربه في السيرك أو حارسه في حديقة الحيوان، طرت فرحا داخل قفصي. شعراء. في تلك المدينة الطيبة البعيدة، في ساحة مليئة بالعشب، كل الأشياء كانت تغني. وكان الناس يرقصون. قال اذهب واطلب المهرة للرقص. كنت خجولا. قال إذا خسر الشعراء لن يربح العالم. وشكرا.
Thank you so much for the beautiful words. Up next, I'd like to welcome to the stage Jamilah Osman.
Can everyone hear me okay?
You sound great.
Okay. Thank you to everyone who's here and to all of the really amazing and talented readers. The first poem I'm reading is called Girls, 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 and it's dedicated to all of my sisters in blood and through struggle. We were girls once, and tragedy was only rumor. None of our neighbors had been shot dead by the police. Trayvon Martin's boyish face bore no resemblance to our first crush. None of us had shut down freeways or bridges in protest. None of our uncles had been tortured in secret CIA prisons. No relatives had been disintegrated by drones and called collateral damage. None of our cousins had perished in refugee camps waiting for paperwork to be processed. No one we knew had been deported. No one we knew was shivering in a detention center. None of our people had been lost to the Sonoran Desert, heat reducing them to teeth scattered in the wind. No one we loved ever boarded a dinghy only to drown in the salt of the sea. None of us had ever been spit on, waiting in the long lines of Qalandia. Nobody's village had been bulldozed, not in Haifa or Jenin or any of the lost cities we name our daughters after. Not a single olive tree had been uprooted. We were girls once. Before the sight of a cop car hollowed the space in our bellies where we kept our brothers' names. Before a man became president and we no longer knew who to trust. Before we learned how many people wanted our parents disappeared. Before the US went to war with countries we might have been born in. Before bombs were dropped over cities we might have been raised in. Before we got our first jobs and our tax dollars massacred people we might have called neighbors. Before strange men called us unfamiliar words as we walked home from school. Before the boys we grew up with put their hands up our skirts without our permission. Before we learned enough Arabic to perform the funeral prayer. Before the first body we mourned was our own. Before we came to know the geography of our mother's grief. Before we contorted our bodies to fill the shape of her lost country. Before the first time we saw our fathers cry. Before we tried to be perfect daughters to repent for their sacrifice. Before we knew there was a border. Before we looked for the border on a map and could not find it. Before we found the border on the roof of our tongues. Before the border was English and no one we loved could cross it. Before we forgot the language of our parents' grief. Before we left with only what we could carry on our backs. Before we returned and found no one who remembered us. We were girls once. Before girl was synonym for battle or country or ghost. We are girls still, braids thick as smoke, refusing to be martyred before our deaths. We answer only to the names we choose for ourselves. And then this last poem I'm going to read is called In Which We Pretend There Was Never a War. Holy kingdom of hash and sweat, mueddin crowing in the distance, the world made in just 6 days. Whose God do you pray to when fear buckles your knees? What name sterns your bowed mouth? Light from the minaret pierces the sky. Waning gibbous, a poet's favorite metaphor. I squint and it is small enough to fit in my pocket. If we try, we can pretend we are anywhere but here. Our people have never known catastrophe. No one died for us to meet here in this land of exiles, on these streets lined with what our fathers could not utter, not in any language of their departure or arrival. Soldiers fired tear gas into crowds of unarmed civilians. The gas becomes a balloon animal puffed to brilliance above the heads of small children. Martyrs bloat to life. A storm of bullets spin back towards the mouth of their sin, ants unfollowing a trail of crumbs. We are not the victims of this war, nor the children of its consequence. There is no blood in our hands, only the pale red light of evening. You pass me a cigarette and I inhale, orbed end, sun of our chosen sky. This is all we know of fire, all we know of smoke. Let me pretend that this is fate, an accident unmarred by the bright wound of our histories. I reach for your hand. Look, everywhere our bodies touch a country where our mothers sing and do not weep. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jamilah. And it's funny because it's Jamilah's birthday and she decided to give us all a gift. So thank you again for that. So I'm going to read 2 poems. In time, all that was good and lost is recovered. Sidi Abu Saleh and I sit on an unfinished veranda, pot of tea teetering on all the time in the world. He laughs into the dusk and I hang on to every lilt, eager to hear of a time when parents were as mischievous as their children. Together we turn a corner into his youth, and even the sun lingers for a chance to listen. Palestine is all hills. No sense asking where the valley ends and the peak begins. Every arch is as blessed as the next. It goes like this. Keys settling into their locks across the country in a symphony rich as atar. The poets finding their works as they left it, cradle their pens and become at once whole again. The lovers collect bushels of jasmine, unabashed in their relief to court without the urgency of a war. The farmers kiss the soil and the land professes her joy to be at home in their hands. I pour my grandfather another cup of tea and we revel in the memory of our grief. Distant as the first gasp of spring morning, beckoning all the loves we buried to sit with us again. He smiles with all his teeth at how, just as the dusk fell and the shop's shelves restocked with poultry and milk, his sons returned to their boyhood, unsaddled with the anguish of a scattered nation, tossed stones only to watch them skip across the river, counting every ripple that formed. The only tragedy they know is a spoiled prank or their mother's holler discovering them skipping school to take the neighbor's daughters to the beach, or the embarrassment of being caught sneaking a cigarette. Eventually, when their rebellion is tempered by their own kin, cheeks precious as the fall harvest, they name all their daughters for the country they are born to and remain for. The truth is, Palestine could never forget her children, and we love her all the more for this. Next up, I have the poem Moon, which is after Fargo Tabachi, one of the other panelists. So in the year 2148, the tallest building in the world is in Palestine and it is an accident. Generations fill our houses to the brim, so we build one floor atop the other. For the first time, all our family lives together, and of course, we live forever when no one is trying to kill us. So in the year 2148, Palestine touches the moon and the stars and the sky. We rest in the great gravity of 2 moving bodies and we love between them both. Here I am no body other than a body of light. I conceive of a thought and birth a second history, a nation so free it bursts out its seams, fills the vastness of our universe with the awiyah of our grandmother. Watch her turn every crater into an olive grove, coaxing water from the impossible. It is beyond a desert and still. In the folds of her hands, it blooms. Here, we are so beautiful that the meteor martyrs itself so we don't have to. Our sons grow into men on their own time and only if they choose. Their home is everywhere, and they ravage no one in search of it. Here I am no woman, no scar of the earth, not countryed into a body. Here I am untethered, free to watch the pull of the ocean from above, free to imagine I am the cause of it. Here I glow by being. I'm stardusted with my people, and we are the constellations they cite as proof of God. And oh, may he bless the magic of it all. Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. I'd like to welcome up next, personal icon, Remy Kanazi.
That's going to be real weird. That's going to be really weird if my poem sucks. Okay. I want to thank the organizers, all the other poets. It's just nice to be here, not even just to perform, but to hear everybody else's words. I'm just going to do one piece that's not, like a BDS piece, but you should boycott Israel and campus divestment and anti-normalization and challenge the shit that you see in front of you, settler colonialism from US to Palestine. But I'm doing a piece that I wrote after a trip to Palestine in 2014, and when thinking about home, and particularly with COVID and a second or third wave and quarantine and being in New York City, just thinking about dislocation and growing up in this super white enclave in Western Massachusetts and feeling like a fish out of water, and going back to Palestine and just wanting to feel a sense of home, but emotionally being pulled in so many different directions as a Palestinian, as an artist, as somebody with a US passport. So this is a piece called Layover in Palestine, and yeah. On a balcony in Bethlehem, Abu Nidal spoke slowly in Arabic, as if a typewriter were catching every letter and intonation. His wrinkled fingers grappled with a coffee cup, contemplative and precise, contours of the Nakba stitched into the history of his face. We stood in front of chopped-down olive trees, a stump-encrusted hillside stripped of its fertility, banned by occupation forces who broke down his door and abducted him and his son. Feeling like a tourist, outside my own skin, passing, never present, wanting to touch everything I came in contact with, in case my palms never pressed down on this earth again. Every trip, like a last goodbye. Entry, never guaranteed. Visa, never guaranteed. Nothing, ever guaranteed. What is the purpose of your visit? Where was your father born? Come with me, put that down, take that off, spread your legs. You understand that this is for security. You can go. Words I never thought I'd hear again. A kid with peach fuzz and a grimace, chest puff and trigger finger itchy. What hollow drones humans become. Got through and felt lucky. Got through and felt ashamed. Got through and felt ashamed that I felt lucky. The empire's passport burning a hole in my back pocket. Just want to sit and feel what it's like to be home without someone pulling on my shoulder, taking me away. Palestine, it stays under a microscope, always communal, never just ours. It's exhausting. Struggle, liberation, a campaign, a Facebook post, constantly searching for the right words to say, the right message to bring, when all I want is to sit in this space, feel this presence, and exist here, if only for a moment. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Remy. We have up next Lina Khaled.
Can you hear me? Yes? Okay.
Yes.
Thank you. It's such a pleasure to be with all of you here. Thank you so much to everyone who worked on this festival. The first poem I'll read is from a work in progress. It's entitled Facts on the Ground. After February's fallow clouds, a fraying whip snaps the air, our bones a winter kingdom. Silence, our shroud, no longer softens absence. The phone lines were always crowded, and now new frontiers for listening, for the theft of our whispers. The unmarked van that arrives at the end of the road is the only country that never hesitates to take us in. Why this particular corpse? Why this particular death and not the many before it, emblazoned with cigarette burns and lacerations? What makes us think it will be this particular boy's jaw unlatched from his tender skull that turns us outward, finally wrests the machinery of slaughter from its masters? How many generations of our children chasing after news cameras, waving victory signs with grimy fingers, chanting, "Take my picture, look over here, tell people what is happening to us." What happened to us? Our children's bodies are infamous, the halls of foreign galleries draped in our spectacular deaths. Is spring simply the son of winter? Has the earth swallowed its fill of us? The second poem is a short one from the chapbook Letters from the Interior, which is a book about poetry and language. Can and her sisters consider the past. Once upon Makan, they gathered. Can and all the verbs that revel in negation. What did not happen to us, what had not taken place, these were the subjects they raised. Can and her sisters were born for lamentation, for dividing time and denying its work. Miss Sahar taught us about this family in Arabic class, the somber sisters of story and how they tell by taking time away. Once upon Makan, they walked through the market, and the woman selling grape leaves called to them from the ground where she sat, and the girl making tea called to them from the window of her house, and the man selling sesame loaves called to them from his wooden cart. Makan, this our homeland, once upon old time? Makan, an end to this story? Once upon Jerusalem, the boy gathering stones called out to them, "Can a poem on this wall," but they keep trying to erase it. I hear the words calling out to me, "If I do not burn, and you do not burn, then who will light the way?" And I'll end with a short poem in honor of those who marched for return in Gaza. Variations on a last chance. The fence does not hold. The wire sheds its barbs, softens to silk thread. The snipers run out of bullets. The desert, as it always has, of its own volition, blooms. The snipers are distracted, sexting their girlfriends. The snipers' eyes are blinded by smoke from our burning tires. The snipers wonder if they will ever see the end of us. The fence does not hold. The snipers take a lunch break. The bullets melt in their chambers. The bullets disintegrate when they reach the word press on Yasser's vest. The news finally breaks the stillness around us. The bullets will themselves away from the boy's skull. The boy's sandals sprout wings, and he hovers above the bullet's path. The snipers do not shoot at the medics evacuating the wounded. The snipers make eye contact with one of us and see. There are enough saline bags at the hospital. The snipers shoot and miss and miss and miss. We outrun the snipers. We bury the dead at the fence, let their roots bloom on the other side of home. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lina. Finally, we have Fargo Tabachi.
Hello, everybody. Wow. I just want to say thank you to all the people whose work has made this festival possible. I want to say especially thank you to the other poets on this panel. Your work has made my writing possible. Your work has made my being possible. The future is unoccupied, and all of you are moving us towards it. And I will see you there, and we will dance together. Thank you. So I'm going to read 2 poems. In the year 2148, our only Nakba? Is the egg yolk broken when it was meant to be fried? The sobbing of a child who's just found that their favorite character does not survive? The scraped knee, the store out of cigarettes already? The unreturned love of freezing morning with the jacket left at home? Time and the wicked things it does to the flesh. The dog's unthinking shit, the stained rug, the stubbed toe, the earth's unthinking belch, a perilously polished floor, and the winsome slipping of a whole healthy foot. You told them, and the fallout of a slipped word or three, the awkward silence when the makluba doesn't flip quite right, the pigeons back into the garden again, though you swore you'd finally managed to shoo them away for good this time. And in this future, with a home uncontested, wholly ours, without the cold blue anger of a body's clockwork stolen, what is left? What is left of that cruel and unredeemable life? Simply the good, hard glare of a cousin whose feet you have just mystified, sent the ball sneaking past them to goal, simply the world's tiny catastrophes and the moments they sweeten. In the year 2148, Palestine qualifies for the World Cup and is eliminated in the semifinals, losing to Chile on penalty kicks. The world seems to have accelerated. Here in the 93rd minute with 4 minutes of stoppage time on the clock, almost done with, all the sand nearly at the bottom of the hourglass. Palestine trails 1-2 against the mighty Chile. A fast-paced game so far, with Diaz's incredible goal from nearly 30 yards away, swiftly followed by another from Galdames, a header off a pass from Cuevas, and then the great Palestinian breath of life, just at the last moment of the first half, from a Mansour, the powerful forward from Jabalia, who slipped just inside the box to bury one between flustered Coelho's legs. And the ball has slipped away from Chile now for a throw-in from Palestine, and it's Sansour who will take it. A long ball in to Baroud, who drives down the center, finding some space. Baroud, that wily center mid from Khan Yunis, whose father was the great Abdelmougni Baroud, the captain of that Palestinian squad in the Golden Age, who led the nation to 2 World Cup wins in 10 years. Across to Ahmed. Ahmed tearing down the right sideline, finds Khaled. Khaled to number 9, Wajid Tabahi. Tabahi breaks away, spins past Santiago. He's tearing down the field, clears 1, 2, 3 defenders, chips the ball forward. A beautiful pass, drifting through the air, light and free. Look at it go. And the pass finds Kanana, who reads it just right, closes his eyes, pulls his head back and thrusts his head forward like it's cupped in the palm of God. And there it is, a header right into the corner, just grazing past the near post. Coelho dives for it, the tips of his fingers just getting acquainted with the ball, but it is still stranger enough to slip past his grasp. The world stops a moment. The land holds its breath. Goal! Palestine scores, bringing the score to a tie 2-2 at the last possible moment. An incredible pass from Wajid Tabahi, and you can see the way he and Kanana are celebrating. The two of them on the ground, their heads touching, their hands laying flat on the turf beside them, fingers loving the soil like family. And now we will go into extra time. The clocks have been hijacked by Palestine. The time has been taken back. This team has not given up the ghost. There is still life in this fight.
Wow. Thank you so much for such a beautiful conclusion, Fargo. That's exactly the world I want to live in. I want to be in the audience at that soccer game. Everyone, we have a wonderful amount of time for a question and answer session. And I don't see any questions yet in the Q&A. So just a reminder, that's on the bottom of the screen. If you have any questions for particular poets or in general to pose to the panelists, that would be great. I'd love to pose a question to the panelists. So if all the panelists could turn on their cameras, that would be really wonderful. Palestinians are known for our poetry, right? It's such a significant part of our tradition. I'm wondering what you think it is about poetry in particular in this form that really speaks to us as a community and speaks to so many oppressed communities around the world. Anyone who has thoughts can jump in. Reading from the chat, someone has said, Sayumi Hab has shared, poetry is the most portable form of creativity. I definitely agree. Fargo, do you have any thoughts on this?
Sure, yeah. I think one of the things that I think about in regards to this question is that for Palestinians and for oppressed people worldwide, language is so often a tool that is used to facilitate our oppression. The language of nations and the language of military, the language of occupations is something that is a really important tool that is used to facilitate colonization, to facilitate violence and murder. And so poetry is so deeply invested in an act of resistance against the colonization of language and against languages being taken up by the forces that keep us apart from each other, that keep us under the heel. And so I think that for me, one of the ways that I think about poetry is as a means to specifically resist that co-opting of language, language being used to kind of fight back against that co-optation.
Tariq, go ahead.
Yeah, I think the only thing I would add is, like Fargo said it perfectly, but if you want to take it a step back, like poetry is a form of storytelling. And so in a lot of ways, storytelling is the ways in which we as a people, not just Palestinians, but marginalized people across the world have for millennia kept our stories alive, but also added to the archives, right? So the only way we can know where we're going to be in the future is to be able to reference our history, excuse me. So when we think about like Palestine and our culture, part of the reason our culture exists is because we've documented it through the stories we tell. So that's, I think, the case for so many different cultures across the world.
Absolutely. And in turning my attention to the questions in the Q&A, thank you so much for adding questions in here. One of the first questions that talked about at first is, just in general, what got everyone to starting to write? If anyone has a special story to share, I would love to hear it.
I'll chime in here. Well, my grandfather was a storyteller. He was the town storyteller, and he, as Tariq said, a big part of our history in our community is the form of storytelling to keep our history alive. So passing down historical moments of our existence in the community, whether it was at family gatherings or religious gatherings, there was always that form of storytelling. And because we are such a poetic people, our language is very poetic in itself. The metaphor is natural. So I was actually making a joke earlier about how hard the translator, the Arabic is already so poetic that he has to translate some English into Arabic, and how complex that could be for one. But in history, I don't know how the saying goes, but where, if they wanted to stop a people, you could destroy art, you could break down statues, but you could not take you can, if the words are strong enough, you cannot take that away from a people. Right. So that's my little take on it.
Yeah, that's so beautifully put, especially with the history of oral tradition and the way that we can preserve our poetry through voice. So I think that's really beautiful. I'd like to bring up another question that we have in the chat. And one of the questions is, how can you achieve, let me read it exactly. How did you achieve the vulnerability needed to be able to perform such deep and personal work publicly? So I'd like to pose the question to our general panelists, but also I'd love to hear Mark's thoughts on this if possible.
Practice. That's what it really comes down to, is practice. Poetry is like, it takes courage, it takes bravery, it takes like pain, looking at all the hardship and like your hurt, your loss, the wounds, and not just yours, but like kind of like studying it. Like whenever I was studying like the actual genocide of my people, and then just like, well, from our genetics to the land to like every ceremony, every way of being was intentionally destroyed as a matter of federal policy. And then kind of realizing like, oh, that's why so many of my relationships with my family are like, you can actually see this global phenomenon happening, and then seeing it interplaced in the different relationships and hardships and trauma that your loved ones and your friends and family go through. And then like, you like, it's kind of like a continuation of like being a warrior. It's just saying like, speaking that truth to the power, and also trying not to overstep the bounds, but saying your perspective. Yeah, but primarily the vulnerability is simply practice. It's like, it's kind of like direct action in a ways. Like the more you do it, the easier it gets.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Mark. Ahlam Hassan asks in the Q&A, do you have specific conditions that you write under? A space, a mood? When do you know a poem is ready to go out into the world? I'd like to pose this question to Lina, because you said that you were performing a work in progress.
Yeah, so I represent the 40+ contingent on this panel. I won't name any names. And those of us who write at this age, the conditions we write under are like when time is available, when there are 5 minutes and not an interruption. And we like, I can say that I'm really grateful for that time when and if I have it. I think that it's good because it, you know, it keeps me accountable as a writer, that poetry, so much of it is compression for me. And so distilling the absolute most necessary and powerful, and having to sort of steal the time sometimes to write even heightens that and keeps me honest.
That's awesome. Does anyone have any particular conditions that they'd like to share? Any setups or practices that you do when you write? I really wish I had. Maybe I might have more discipline if I did. So if any of you could give me some advice, I would love that.
I steal the 5 minutes. That's my advice. Like 5 minutes count. It's good. 5 minutes a day, 5 minutes multiple times a day. Sometimes there's pressure to like have, you know, the writer's life, a writing residency and the perfect desk and no into any, and that's beautiful and it's great if you can have it, but so much can happen in those moments, and you'd be surprised where you can find them. And returning to the page every day, the kind of prayerful discipline of that is can be really generative.
Thank you, Lina. I appreciate that. So I have a question from Lara, who says, this one's for Rafif. The term Arab women of color from your poem Shades of Anger has resonated so much with me. Can you please elaborate on that specific thought?
Yeah, I wrote that poem a while ago around the war on Iraq. And we were really being used, our bodies were being used, the idea that this war is to liberate women in Afghanistan, this war is to liberate women in Iraq. And I was being called angry so much of the time. So I just got sick of it and decided I want to reclaim the word. Yes, I'm angry. I actually don't understand why you're not all as angry about the state of the world as I am. So it was a bit of a reclamation of the term. And in the activist spaces as well, we had our own internal struggles of, you know, women never being able to be on the mic, women not being able to speak. So it was also about showing that we're there in the organizing and the activism at the same time. And I'm glad the poem has resonated with a lot of people, because there's a lot of us angry Arab women of color out there, and our shades of anger differ. That's why that's the second line, and everybody expresses it differently. Some of us do it through poetry, some of us do it through organizing, and there are different ways we can all be doing this work that we do.
That's really, yeah, that's really beautiful. I will actually share that, Rafik, you are probably the first Palestinian poet I knew of. Way back when. I watched that video, my mom showed it to me and she was like, look at what we can do. So it's really beautiful. So thank you for talking about that one. So we are getting a bunch of questions about English and Arabic poetry, so the language transition. Belkis asks, do you feel close to or are inspired by Palestinian poets writing in Arabic, or do you draw more inspiration from English? A question by an Arab poet who's struggling to transition to English. So I would love to hear from Fadi, who does a lot of, who said that he shared an interpretation of a poem in Arabic and in English. If he's still here, he might not be. He might have had to step out. Also, if we could hear from Darine a little bit about that relationship to other Arab poets.
بعتقد أنا الإنسان لما بيكتب شعر هو بيتواصل مع كل الشعراء الآخرين، لأنه بيوصل ثقافي من الحياة اللي هو عايشها. فباعتقادي إنه ضروري جدا إن الإنسان يكون مرتبط ثقافيا مع الشعراء الآخرين، لأنه برأيي إنه الشعر هي وسيلة اتصال ما بين الثقافات الأخرى. والشاعر لما بيكتب عمليا بيكتب بمشاعره بالحياة اللي هو عايشها في البيئة اللي هو عايشها. مثلا أنا لما بكتب على السجن، فعمليا أنا بخلي الشعراء الثانيين أو الآخرين يلتقوا مع المعاناة اللي أنا عشتها من خلال كتابتي. لقاء الكتابة عن طريق الشعر هي جدا جدا مهمة مع الشعراء الآخرين، مع حتى الثقافات الأخرى، مش شرط بس كمان الشعراء العالم الآخر اللي إحنا ما بنشوفه. فالشعر والفن بشكل عام هي وسيلة جدا قيمة لتواصل ما بين الثقافات بالأساس، والتعرف على الحياة المختلفة ما بين شاعر وشاعر، وبالذات المكان. مثلا أنا ما فيني مثلا أجي أكتب أنا عايشة بفلسطين، ما فيني أجي أكتب مثلا عن حياة الإنسان اللي عاش لجوء بمخيم، لأني أنا ما عشت المخيم، ما عشت حياة المخيم. نفس الشيء الإنسان اللي عاش بحياة المخيمات، ما لما إذا بدي يجي يكتب عن الحياة بفلسطين ما راح يقدر يكتب زي كيف أنا مثلا بكتب. فهذه التواصل ممكن إنه أنا لما أكتب عن شعور محدد أنا عايشته، فأنا ممكن أساعد الشاعر الآخر إنه يكتب أو يحس هذه المشاعر اللي ما بيقدر يعيشها.
Thank you so much, Darine. We have another question talking about who are the poets, writers, and artists that inspired you all early on. I'd like to share that I'm really lucky to be in a panel right now and a Zoom with a lot of them. But I'd love to hear from Jamilah. Who are some of the poets and writers and thinkers that have inspired your work?
I guess that's always changing. In the beginning, it was, my mother, my grandmother, family members who were some traditional poets, and then a lot of them just storytellers, because our language in Somali is already so poetic and colorful. And so those were the first writers and storytellers I knew. And then as I got older and I tried to find a way to join like the organizing that I was doing with the writing that I was doing, my attention shifted to writers like June Jordan, Amiri Baraka, Black writers who showed us that, you know, art was sort of inseparable from revolution and from the kind of radical imagining that we need to do.
Thank you so much. Rafiq, yeah, go ahead.
I just wanted to give a shout out to Zuhair Hamad, and other people are doing it, but I think she was an inspiration for so many of us. I was terrified of getting on stage and speaking in English. I made so many mistakes, and seeing her was like really got me to be able to get on stage. So shout out to Zuhair if she's out there.
She was one of my first mentors, I have to say that, 100%. She told me, be that girl that you're afraid to be. And I will never forget that.
Yeah, my origin story, my brother and sister took me to go see Def Poetry Jam on Broadway in 2004. She was the first poet I saw perform live, or the first Palestinian poet I saw perform live. So shout out to Zuhair and much love.
What a beautiful origin story. I think I had a similar one. I think I also watched Def Poetry Jam, but I watched on TV when I was a kid. So there's a question from Giovanna who says, do you think of yourselves as poets and activists, or one and the same thing? How do these worlds collide in your life and your work? And of course, this is an open question to everyone.
I can't answer.
Yeah.
بالنسبة لي أنا في حياتي أنا مثلا أنا إنساني شاعري، وبنفس الوقت أنا إنساني ناشطة. وبهاي الحالة أنا كتير بحس إنه لما بدمج بين العملين بحس إني أنا بكمل نفسي كإنساني شاعري، لأني أنا بقدر أخدم شعبي، أبناء شعبي، وبنفس الوقت بقدر أخدم القضية بشكل عام. عمليا أنا ما بخزن نفسي فقط بالكتابة، إنما أنا بقدر أكون، لأني عايشة كمان بفلسطين، فأنا مفروض فيه إنه أكون كمان فعالة مش بس بالكتابة، إنما كمان أقدر أساعد بأي عمل تاني، نشاط أو كأكتيفيست في داخل وطني. فبالنسبة إلي بحس إنه الشعر بيكمل النشاط السياسي أو النشاط الاجتماعي أو إلى ما إلى ذلك. وبنفس الوقت كوني ناشطة بيعطيني إلهام آخر للكتابة من خلال العمل التطوعي أو العمل اللي أنا بقوم فيه كإنسانة ناشطة. فالأعمال اللي أنا بقوم فيها ممكن تعطيني إيحاء لكتابة قصائد جديدة أو أعمال جديدة. فبالنسبة إلي بعتقد أنه لا يمكن فصل الإنسان الناشط عن الإنسان الشاعر. برأيي أنه كل إنسان شاعر لازم يكون ناشط في مجتمعه عشان يقدر أنه يوصل للمجتمع أو للإنسان اللي للمتلقي عمليا. فما في مجال أنه نفصل ما بين الاثنين. الإنسان اللي بده يكون شاعر لازم يكون فعال مع مجتمعه ومع البيئة، المكان اللي هو موجود فيها. وبالنسبة في كمان سؤال لإلي موجه، بدي أنتقل لأقوله اللي بحكي كيف كانت تجربة السجن مشابهة لتجربة الحياة تحت الاحتلال كسجن من نوع آخر. حقيقة لأني أنا يعني بما أني أنا عشت السجن الفعلي اللي هو داخل السجن والمعتقل، وبنفس الوقت بعد ما طلعت عشت بسجن الكبير الحقيقي اللي هو السجن الاحتلال، اللي هو ما في له قيود، اللي بعيش حاله لما الإنسان بعيش بوطنه وبحس حاله إنه نوعا ما سجين، ما بيقدر يمارس شغله زي ما لازم، ما بيقدر إنه يعيش حياته اللي لازم المفروض يعيشها كحياة كإنسان عادي مثل أي شعوب، مثل أي شعب آخر. الإنسان الفلسطيني سجين بالفعل. هي اللي سأل ابتسام لما سألت السؤال كانت جدا دقيقة. عمليا فعلا التناقضات اللي أنا عشتها بعد ما أنا طلعت من السجن، صرت أسأل نفسي هل أنا حقيقة اتحررت من السجن، أم أنا لسه موجودة بسجن أكبر، سجنوني بسجن أكبر عمليا. وهذا هو السجن الفعلي، إنه السجن ما بيكون بمعنى إنه سجن فقط قيود ومبنى سجن، لأ، للأسف نحن موجودين في سجون نفسية كمان، سجون اجتماعية، سجون اللي إحنا عايشين فيها كلياتنا كمجتمع فلسطيني بسبب الاحتلال وبسبب أنفسنا كمان. وأنا في عندي إشي كتير مهم باحكيه دائمًا، الحرية هي لمّا الإنسان بحس إنه هو حر بنفسه، لمّا نتحرر نحن من أنفسنا، من اعتقالنا لأنفسنا، هي الحرية بالذات. لكن الاحتلال عمليًا ما عم بخلّينا نحس بمعنى الحرية. حتى بعد ما اتحررت من السجن للأسف ما حسيت إنه أنا حرة، لإنه في طول الوقت عم باحس كمان في أسرى وأسيرات أنا تركتهم وراي، وبنفس الوقت شعبي كله هو أسير، أسير للاحتلال، ما بين اللجوء، ما بين غزة، ما بين الضفة، أسير ما بين كل الاختلافات هذه وكل الاحتلالات الداخلية اللي إحنا بنعيشها كمان. فصعب جدًا إنه نعيش ضمن هذا السجن الكبير طول الوقت والتناقضات اللي أنا باعيشها. فوصلت لمرحلة إنه الواحد بيصل لمرحلة بيحكي إنه أنا وصلت لمرحلة أحكي إنه السجن الفعلي اللي أنا كنت فيه ولا إشي قدام السجن اللي أنا عشت فيه واللي أنا بلشت أحس فيه ضمنًا وفعليًا بعد السجن الفعلي. لأنه التقييدات اللي إحنا بنعيشها كفلسطينيين كمان، حتى أنا ضمن إنه داخل وأنا معي كمان اللي ما يقال عنها الهوية الإسرائيلية، لكن أنا بالنسبة إلي هي احتلال، هي نفسها هاي. بمجرد إنه أنا ولدت باحكي عربي ومعي هوية اللي هي بتحمل اسمي مش بلغتي، هذا هو السجن اللي أنا بعيشه عمليا. شكرا.
شكرا تالين. So we also have Leah Kayali, for this will be our last question, has asked, and it looks like Tarek's going to answer this question: who, if anyone, do you write and perform poetry for? What do you think about things that may get lost in translation to different audiences?
So I think at first, one sec. Just go. Sorry, my brother's entering a basement. So I was gonna say, first and foremost, like, I think the reason I wanted to ask this question is because when I got started off, I felt like I had to write for the world around me, right? I had to write for everybody else to convince them of why Palestinians deserve human rights, why we deserve to be offered the ability to be liberated and free, etc. Because I felt like when we talk about activism, when we talk about all this work, poetry for me was a tool to kind of illuminate people about our struggle. But as I got older, I think for me, I write for myself first and foremost, and for the people around me. And by people around me, I mean our people, us, because I think that if you don't create for yourself, then you don't do the work of sustaining yourself and creating the stories you need to see to live long enough to create for others and to engage with others. So nowadays, my answer is very shortly, I write for myself first and foremost, but I share for others to connect. And hopefully all the stories that I write feed somebody Palestinian, somebody marginalized in some way or another, because by doing so, I mean, part of the reason I even got into slam was to meet people and make friends. So like, I write for myself so I can sustain myself, and I write and I share just so I can meet others. So don't feed into like the whole Western gaze of trying to write to serve somebody else.
Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you to all of the poets for being here. It's been a joy. And so we're right up at the end of the hour. I just want to say, if anyone took any pictures, hashtag Palestine Writes, download the translated poems so that you can keep them as your little keepsake from Palestine Writes. Thank you all again from the bottom of my heart. I'm really blessed to be a part of this.
Thank you.